Hi, I'm Jon,
I'm Pete.
and this is the Fishtolian. We quite often meet up early like this, but normally it's to be heading off to somewhere a bit more exotic, up to mid Wales with our bivvy bags, or down to the southwest, or even up to Scotland or Ireland. But today we're going somewhere much more local. We're going to head over to our most local river, which I guess is only a bit over a mile away. We had a revelation there back in the summer of last year, which kind of changed everything. So we managed to catch a trout, and Pete will explain a bit more how we got to that place, and that became the birth of the Fishtolian. Basically, we thought, well, if there's a trout here, there could be a trout anywhere. So let's explore our city. So Pete, how did we end up trying to catch a trout on the Trym?
I think I stumbled across a website called Trout. What was it called? Yeah, it was called Trout in the Trym.
Yeah.
Which describes a group of community groups in northwest Bristol, Sustainable Southmead, Friends of Badock's Wood, Friends of Blaze Castle, Sustainable Sea Mills, and a few others have all joined together to take care of the river on their patch. They were doing their own activities in their own area, and then they sort of worked out that, hang on a sec, this area is a bit of green space that goes right through northwest Bristol, and with the river, as the focal point running through it. And they organised themselves into a sort of umbrella group called Trout in the Trym, with the aim of improving the river to the extent that there's some, could be some fish in there.
Okay. And I mean, did any of them actually believe that there might be a trout in the Trym at that point?
There'd been a few reports of people having seen fish, and I think somebody had said they'd seen an eel, which is obviously anyone pretty well can identify an eel. And there were reports of sticklebacks, but that was really it. Somebody mentioned some fish down at the bottom end of the river,
Okay.
Towards the mouth, where they were slightly bigger, and there was a group of them, and I explored, and the impression I got is those may have been something like roach.
Okay.
So they're sort of smallish shoal fish.
A lot more tolerant of water conditions,
warm
range
water, low oxygen, etc.
Okay.
But having helped out on some of the Trout in the Trym activities, which at that stage largely revolved around removing rubbish actually from in the river, tons and tons of it have been taken out since. I was challenged, really, if they're trying to get trout or to get the river healthy enough to have trout back in it, how do they know there aren't any in there already?
Okay.
So I rocked up.
Don't need much coaxing, do we?
Not really, no. I started to loiter on the banks a bit, and it went from there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've both known the Trym, right? You've been in Bristol since like the mid-'80s, something like that. And I was born here. I mean, I literally would have been taken down to the banks of the Trym as a toddler. So, we both know that river very well. And I mean, from my point of view, I didn't even think there was any fish in there, let alone,
No.
Okay, you do see a heron, so there must be something, but, certainly not. I never dreamed there was trout in there.
No.
So, I mean, it was like a proper shock, wasn't it? It was a real revelation for us.
Oh, absolutely. Well, looking over my wife's got a good friend who lives right in the middle of Westbury-on-Trym, a stone's throw from where the Trym flows through the town centre, and it's in a really deep, it comes out of a culvert into a really deep sort of V-shaped concrete channel with a flat bottom. I've never seen more than about a centimetre of water in it, and in the summer it smells distinctly dodgy. So that was my impression of the Trym up until that point, I must say.
So the Trym's got a lot of challenges, environmental challenges that it faces, and we'll look into those a bit more once we're on the riverbank. We've chatted before about the Trym and where it is situated in Bristol, and we had an interesting conversation once about how rivers kind of don't discriminate in terms of where they flow. And Bristol's a funny city, isn't it? Because actually, it's got this sort of impression of being kind of almost like a little republic and very integrated and everything. But actually, it's quite segregated in some ways, isn't it? And the Trym's sort of a good example of that, because it kind of flows through all kinds of different areas, doesn't it?
Well, it does. So the Trym itself starts on Filton Golf Course.
Okay.
And that then goes into a culvert, but comes out in Southmead, in one of the big council estates in North Bristol. Flows on down through Westbury-on-Trym, through the old village, where it's now in all the concrete works each side of it, and no one really sees the little stream. Whereas the Hazel Brook, its main tributary, rises up it actually rises in Cribbs Causeway, in the big regional shopping centre for Bristol and Cardiff. So, all sorts of pressures on the river from those different things. It's not like we've got industry. When we go to other rivers in Bristol, we'll see a legacy of proper heavy industry, but here we haven't. But we've got an 18th century park landscape laid out where they're putting weirs all the way up and down the Hembrook.
And what's the issue with weirs, Pete?
Well, they were put in to make nice tinkly sounds and to look pretty, but they've completely you've made it drastically more difficult for eels and trout and other fish to migrate up and down the river.
Okay.
So you've got very little living now in the upper Hembrook, which is a real shame.
Okay.
The Trym, meanwhile, you've got some weirs, but not as high and not as many, so probably that's a bit better connected.
Yeah, because don't trout need to get up to quite often to the headwaters in order to spawn? What is it about the headwaters that makes them special?
To find the sort of right size gravel and areas of the river that have got less sort of other fish snooping around, basically, which would eat all the eggs.
Okay.
So it's cover and gravel really thereafter. So they would go up there.
Okay.
But you're right. Bristol is very patchy. So looking at the cars, you'd say Coombe Dingle and Snade Park. They're the posh bits of Bristol really, and it flows through them, and it flows through other areas that are facing more of a challenge, certainly.
And quite a surprise to us that in the middle of this massive council estate, which was kind of built, I think half of it was built pre-war and the second half after the war, was something very much older. Well,
yeah, and in Badock's Wood you've got the Southmead Barrow, which is like 1500 BC, which has been there for, So, which just shows really, there's been humans influencing the landscape and the stream here, for millennia. And then right down at the mouth, we won't fish down there because it's, we might catch a flounder down there, but we won't catch a trout. You've got the little Roman port.
Incredible. So there's a lot of history in this river, right?
Yeah, there is.
Talking of sea mills, didn't you see some evidence of some other creatures living down there?
Yeah, well, we were taking out the usual loads of car batteries, industrial strength plastic, carpets, etc. And down in that bottom stretch where it's affected by the tide, I was bumped into by a couple of flounder, and then I found a dead one on a branch washed up by the side of the river that had its head very neatly removed and looked like an otter kill.
Okay.
Certainly there is a thing called the Bristol Otter Group.
Yep.
And they've regularly recorded sites of otters in the sea mills area. So they're sniffing around. I think certainly the males have got quite big territories, and they'll just keep an eye on their whole patch and check out what's available.
So that'll be something to look out for when we hit the other rivers.
Certainly would be, and certainly I've heard about otters being sighted on the Colleter's Brook.
Excellent. Okay, so we're looking out for otter spraints.
Yes.
Which are basically their poos, right?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, I've also heard of deer, down on the banks of the Avon there at Sea Mills. I think.
Yes.
I don't know how they get over. Do they come over the suspension bridge?
I would imagine they swim, to be honest.
Well, that's
Yeah,
brilliant.
over from the Lee Woods side.
Yeah. Well, considering that river's got the certainly this Severn Estuary's got one of the highest tidal ranges in the world. They must be brave deer.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I wouldn't do it.
No. So basically, we've been waiting for this day for a long time, haven't we, Pete? We've been doing this research over the winter, checking out all these rivers, particularly the Trym, I guess, because it's our closest. But yeah, it's the date. So is it the third day? 3rd of April? 4th of April, right? And the trout season starts on the 1st. We were hoping to get down on the 1st, actually. But it was unseasonably cold. I think it went down to about 0.
Yeah, there was a frost on the cars.
And I did notice actually on my social media there was quite a lot of anglers did go and brave that on the Usk and some of the Welsh rivers where the trout, the big trout come out right at the beginning of the season. But we thought actually, let's give ourselves a bit of a fighting chance. We still can't believe that we found a trout there. So at least let's wait for some better conditions. And actually today, pretty much perfect, I'd say. Sort of over 10 degrees, so it's sort of reasonably warm. It's nice and overcast. Trout don't particularly like bright sunlight, so hopefully we'll see some flies come off. We know there are flies there. We'll talk about that a bit later. And we're gonna head down and see what happens. See you on the riverside. So we're just heading out in the car now. Going up, those who know Bristol, we're going up Gloucester Road, which is about as urban as it gets. Just past a massive graffiti piece, and people are just sort of waking up, waiting for buses, getting on voice scooters, getting ready to go to work. It's still pretty quiet because it's early and it's just starting to get light. And we're making our way up through North Bristol, kind of almost onto the fringes of North Bristol. But still kind of suburban, if not urban, where we'll find the River Trym. Bristol's quite famous for its kind of urban wildlife. I think it goes back to kind of the 70s or 80s when there was a documentary, I think it was on the BBC, about Bristol's urban foxes. And there's not really a day that goes by where you don't see a fox, particularly around our house. We've got allotments out the back. But even more recently, a friend of Pete's actually found a deer in their back garden, and this is right in the middle of urban Bristol. So, and we've both seen badgers. I had a badger in my back garden. So there's so much abundant wildlife, even within a city. And people seem to focus on the mammals. They're impressive, and rightly so. But quite often they forget what's below the waterline, and the little streams that kind of ribbon through the city. Being anglers, we're quite interested in that. So we just come over the crest of a hill, and Pete tells me we're now into the Trym catchment. There's a couple of little streams around here that kind of are tributaries of the Trym. I mean, the Trym's such a tiny trickle itself. It seems insane that it's got tributaries, but there are these little tiny streams that are battling out in amongst all these houses, making their way down into the Trym and then on down into the Avon and then into the Bristol Channel. So we are now on the Trym's turf and heading ever closer to our destination.
So here we are, we've just parked up in a lay-by above Coombe Dingle. John is just finishing tackling up. He's putting on it's not a copper, John. It's, what have you got on, John?
Well, it's just a little imitation of a caddisfly, because we were down here a couple of weekends ago doing a riverfly survey, and we found some caddis in amongst the samples, cased and caseless. So I'm thinking maybe that's a good imitation to put on.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, one of the things we've found in the Trym is quite a limited range of river flies, and up till that point we hadn't found any caddis, aside from some micro caddis, little pupae cases, tiny, 3 millimeters long. the caddis we found last weekend, though, were full-on cased caddis and free-swimming caseless caddis. So much will like it.
For the sort of non-anglers or the non-naturalists who maybe don't know their river flies, would people have seen caddis flies? Is there some way that you can identify them, that they may have seen them around?
Yeah, they're not the most spectacular looking of creatures. They're a bit like moths, really. So you'd see clouds of them flying around your stream, your river, through the day, possibly more likely in the evening. One thing is when they land, they've got long antennae that stick out the front, and that's quite characteristic and very different from a moth. And they hold their wings like a little roof shape over their back. And the Latin name for the family is Trichoptera, because they've sort of got a triangular shape because of the wings.
Okay. So the other place we've come across caddis flies is up on the Barrow Tanks, which are the reservoirs that feed Bristol. And that, as our friend who lives around here, Nick, would say, they're in biblical numbers up there, right? You almost inhale them.
Yeah, I've been up to the tanks when, and that's our drinking water. There's been a tide mark around the whole, all three reses, sort of 18 inches, 2 foot thick, and to a depth of sort of a centimetre or two of caddis cases and shucks, and as uncountable.
So we've just arrived in the area that we're going to fish. We're by the river now, and as we were coming through the gates of the car park, what we used to call back in the 70s, the parkie was there unlocking the gates and wanted to know what we were doing. Couldn't quite believe it that we were going fishing here. I think that's the general reaction. People just would assume there's nothing in here, and they would never have seen someone fishing here before. So kind of almost doubting our own sanity if we hadn't actually caught one previously. So let's hope they're still here. The first pool that we've chosen to fish, it's almost an entirely man-made structure, actually. There's a little weir at the head, but it's, I would say, almost certainly the deepest pool on the river. We're hoping that it's home to a trout. Pete's just getting into position. By the way, if you go to the Fishtolian on Instagram, at the Fishtolian, we're going to put up some pictures from our trips, so you can check out all the things that I'm sort of trying to describe here and see what they actually look like. So Pete's just getting in position, getting ready to put his flies out and see if we can find a brownie. So we just finished on this first pool. Pete was first off in here, and I suppose after about half a dozen casts, fish on. And we got to see it. It was a lovely brown trout. I reckon it was about, 7 or 8 inches, Pete?
It wasn't a monster.
It wasn't a monster, no, but it was a wild brown trout, right? I think we can safely identify that one. Unfortunately, it managed to, well, fortunately for the trout, but it managed to come off after about 3 or 4 seconds. But it's certainly given us a bit of hope, and we're going to move on from here, give this pool a bit of a rest. We denied a dog its swim this morning, unfortunately. Its kindly owner decided to take it to a different pool. So we're going to free this one up for other dogs that undoubtedly are going to come and want to have a dip. So we got to the second pool that we've earmarked. Pete's just getting into position. It's all very, very tight here. There's loads of, particularly now we're getting into spring, there's lots of growth on the trees, shrubs and bits and pieces, just all desperate to kind of grab hold of your fly here. But as we were walking down, we saw a fish rise, which is incredible. I mean, I've never seen a fish rise, but I guess on here, in the past, but I guess they've always been rising. It's just, if you're not looking out for it, you don't see it. But now we are looking out for it. We've started to notice them. So Pete's just making a few. Oh, and he's in. Fish on. Wow, that's a really good fish. Okay, I'm going to just switch off and get down with the net.
John's now fishing in a really tricky lie. Deep pool. Just above a whole mass of wooden debris that's gathered on a fallen tree. No, it really is tricky, this lie. I have to come back here with a handsaw, I think. clear some of the branches for another time. Oh, that's it. Now he's got it in the zone. That's more like it. He's covering the water now. And he's in. Oh, yeah, there's a decent fish. Splashing on the surface. Trying to get into the root ball. Oh, doing a good job. Hold him out, John. Yeah, no, he's bringing him over to the net. Oh, it's a beautifully coloured fish. This is a nice one. And our second Trym trout of the morning. Good job, John. Yeah, so John's just released that fish. We both reckon a good 10 inches. Stunning. Lovely, particularly on the tail. Such a lot of red. Beautiful fish.
So Pete's back on his turn. I think we're going a fish each now. I never thought that would have been possible, but Pete's back on. There's a lovely looking run here, but there's a willow withy that's just hanging right down in the worst possible spot for a cast. But, you know, we like that. In a sense, it's wild, it's been unmanicured, and we've got to find a way to work our way around these various obstacles, which is part of the challenge. Really enjoy that. So he's just putting his flies just up as near as he can to the withy without getting caught in it. And we'll see if there's anyone at home. So the dog walkers are out in force now. There's flocks of dogs here, loads of them. They all look like they're having a great time. Fortunately, none of them have jumped in the river near us yet, so that's cool. But, you know, it's their river too. That's fine. We're tucked away under a tree here. I don't think anyone can see us, actually, so good. And Pete's just disturbed the kingfisher. It was about 6 foot away from him, just suddenly took off and flash blew down the river. So he's trying to make a very tricky cast in under some trees here. It does look a particularly nice bit of water. The river curling round on the outside bank under a load of roots, partially fallen tree, and it looks just the kind of place that a trout would like to make its home. Fantastic.
So Wessex Water, the local water company, are progressing with a major piece of infrastructure, a new relief surf for northwest Bristol. I think they're spending about 63 million. It's due to come online back end of 2023. And when it does, they've said that it should take a lot of the pressure off the combined sewer outflows, CSOs, which feed into the Trym. So fingers crossed that will actually make a difference to the water quality. Still leaves us with an issue with the Hazel Brook, where the Rivers Trust data showing all the CSOs in the country shows there are virtually none on the Hazel Brook, and yet the Hazel Brook's got worse water quality. So there's some investigation needed there. Personal view is there's a whole load of misconnections we've got to trace and get fixed. So that's still in Wessex's in tray.
And particularly in this area, there's evidence of those CSOs. There's some big storm drains further down with manhole covers on. You get a decent amount of rain down here. Those just get blown off with the extra water, and the next day you'll find debris around those covers, wipes, toilet paper, usual towels. Yeah, it's just, it's not good. It's not good, and it's only yards from the river, so, you know, with a good flood, that will just get washed in. And it makes it even more of a miracle that there are bugs and there are brown trout and all the things that they support in the ecosystem living around here. Herons.
It's not great for the dog owners. Probably don't realise what their dogs are swimming in. And I've seen kids play in this stream regularly.
Yeah, I think the pool which we first tried is a real local swimming spot. So, you know, it's nice to think that kids can do that. It's just it'd be even nicer if they were doing it in sewage-free water.
The path on this bit of the lower Trym pushes past the remains of the cliffs, because the whole area is on carboniferous limestone, and they're right down by the river here. Not high, 20 foot, but still quite impressive. One thing about the Trym, there's very little plants. There's algae, a little bit of filamentous algae and algae on the surface of stones. But in terms of things like water crowfoot, nothing. Just down on this stretch, which John and I are fishing near the bottom of the river, near the mouth, there is some water moss, though. So that's good habitat for various creatures. and indicative of some sort of river health.
One of the man-made signatures, apart from the CSOs, of this river is there's a wannabe Banksy graffiti artist in this area called Bumpsy, who seems to enjoy putting pictures of Mr. Bump on man-made structures around here. And to be honest, they kind of brighten the place up, actually. They're quite cool. I'll put some pictures on the Instagram.
So, of the 12 Bristol streams, that's one with trout in it.
Yeah, one down. So what a great start. It's certainly spurred me on to look forward to the next one. I haven't quite decided which one that's going to be yet, but we've got a list. We've got a wish list, and it'll be one of them. So, yeah, we'll see you there. Whoa, what a morning. Back home now, and just reflecting on an incredible little session down on the Trym. I mean, fantastic. We set out to find some brown trout, and we found some wild brown trout. They were like little jewels. They were amazing. Actually, quite a bit bigger than I'd imagined from such a tiny little stream with all its challenges. I think the biggest one we caught was probably getting on towards 11 inches, maybe 12 inches. And the other one was, around about 9 or 10. So, good sized wild brown trout. And the main thing was that they were there. We lost one as well that was probably only about 3 or 4 inches, which is a really good sign and shows that, that there are juvenile fish there, and, the population's going to keep going. So that's fantastic. And now our minds are turning on to where's next. We've got a list of all the little streams in Bristol, and we've singled out some that we think might hold brown trout. We don't know. Some of them we think do, from doing a bit of research, but some of them we've got no idea. So we're gonna wait and see what the weather does. The smaller ones in particular will need a bit of rain to raise them up to a level which they're fishable. So we're going to keep an eye on the weather, and as soon as we can, we're going to go out and have another go and see if there are more wild brown trout in Bristol. And we'd love it if you came with us. So please subscribe to the podcast. Also, go to at the Fishtolian on Instagram and follow us there. We'll put up pictures of our adventures, what happened today on the Trym, and every other time we go out. We'll also put up info about when the next podcast is coming out. We'll also put up numbers for reporting sewage pollution or any other pollution incidents to the EA or Wessex Water. So go to our Instagram feed for that kind of stuff. And just want to say thank you to a few people who've helped us get this far with the podcast, particularly Jack Ogborn, who's taken our random selection of sound recording clips and actually crafted them into something that resembles a podcast. You've worked a miracle, Jack. Thank you so much. Also to Bingo Fury, who've let us use their last single, Birchall and Kings, as our theme tune. Go and check them out on Spotify and YouTube. They're amazing. And Danny Jenkins, who designed our visual ident. And it's great working with you, Dan. Thanks so much for your time on this, and I look forward to teaming up for the next Fly Culture magazine. Also to Pete Tigers, my boss at Fly Culture, who's produced loads of podcasts for Fly Culture. Check them out. They're amazing. Great interviews with people in fly fishing, including Fergal Sharkey and Paul Whitehouse and over 125 others. So go and check them out. They're brilliant. And yeah, thanks, Pete, also for taking care of the technical side and uploading the podcast and everything. Please subscribe and come with us on our next adventure. Cheers.